On October 30th, 2018, at approximately 11:15 a.m., a group of construction workers arrived at a rural property in Inver Grove Heights, Minnesota. They were there to remove an old, abandoned septic tank that had been sitting unused on the land for years. The property had recently been sold, and the new owners wanted the tank removed for safety reasons. As the crew began their work, draining the contents of the concrete tank, one of the workers noticed something that made his blood run cold. There, submerged in the dark, stagnant water, was what appeared to be human remains. What they had just discovered would solve a mystery that had haunted a family for over 3 years. A mystery that began with a missing wife, a suspicious husband, and a story that never quite added up. This is the true story of Dee Ann Warner, a 52-year-old wife and mother who disappeared from her own home in the middle of the night. A woman whose husband reported her missing but seemed strangely unconcerned about her whereabouts. A case where investigators knew something terrible had happened but couldn't prove it, until that septic tank gave up its dark secret. This is an investigation that shows how persistence, forensic science, and one family's refusal to give up finally brought a killer to justice. Dee Ann Swisher was born in 1966 in Lenawee County, Michigan. She grew up in a farming community where everyone knew everyone, where handshake deals still meant something, and where family ties ran deep. She was known as a hard-working, no-nonsense woman who loved her family fiercely and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Friends from her younger years remembered Dee Ann as someone who lit up a room, who had a quick wit and an infectious laugh. She met Dale Warner in the mid-1980s. Dale came from a farming family in Lenawee County as well. They seemed like a natural match, two people from similar backgrounds with an understanding of farm life and rural living. They married in 1987 and settled into life on a farm property near the small community of Tecumseh, Michigan, close to the Michigan-Ohio border. Over the years, Dee Ann and Dale built a life together. They had no children of their own, but Dee Ann had children from a previous relationship who she remained close to. The Warners operated a trucking business together, Warner Trucking, which hauled agricultural products and materials across the Midwest. Dee Ann handled much of the business side of operations, managing paperwork, invoices, scheduling, and finances. Dale primarily handled the physical operations and driving. To people on the outside, the Warners appeared to be a successful couple. They owned property, ran a business, and seemed financially stable. But according to Dee Ann's family, particularly her daughter Greg Jovanovich, things behind closed doors were far more complicated than they appeared. Greg would later tell investigators that her mother had confided in her for years about problems in the marriage. According to Greg, Dale Warner was controlling and had a temper. Dee Ann had mentioned on multiple occasions that she was unhappy and had considered divorce, but she was worried about what would happen to the business they had built together. The trucking company was successful, and Dee Ann knew that a divorce would mean dividing assets and potentially destroying what they had spent years building. In early 2021, according to family statements, the tension in the Warner marriage had reached a breaking point. Dee Ann had apparently made the decision that she was done. She had begun taking steps to protect herself financially. She had started documenting business finances, making copies of important documents, and consulting with people about her options for separating from Dale while protecting her interests in the trucking business. Friends of Dee Ann later told investigators that she had mentioned Dale's behavior had become increasingly aggressive as the marriage deteriorated. She said Dale had made comments that scared her, vague threats about what would happen if she tried to leave or tried to take the business from him. But Dee Ann was not someone who scared easily. She had stood up for herself her entire life, and she wasn't about to let anyone intimidate her into staying in a marriage she no longer wanted. Now, before we continue with what happened in April 2021 and the investigation that would span years, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at True Crime Vault, we unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. We bring you detailed investigations based on real cases, court documents, and factual evidence, always treating victims and their families with the dignity and respect they deserve. If you appreciate the research and care that goes into these documentaries, hit that like button. It truly helps us continue telling these important stories. New investigations every week. On April 25, 2021, Dale Warner contacted the Lenawee County Sheriff's Office to report his wife Dee Ann missing. According to Dale's initial statement, he last saw Dee Ann on the evening of April 24th at their home on Munger Road in Rollin Township, Michigan. He told deputies that they had gotten into an argument that night about the trucking business and financial matters. Dale claimed that during this argument, Dee Ann became very upset and told him she was leaving. According to Dale's account, Dee Ann went upstairs, packed a bag with some clothes and personal items, and left the house around 11 p.m. on April 24th. He said he watched her get into her vehicle, a white Chrysler 300, and drive away. Dale told investigators that he assumed Dee Ann had gone to stay with family or friends to cool off. He claimed that he thought she would return in a day or two once she had calmed down. But when Dale hadn't heard from Dee Ann by the afternoon of April 25th, and when his attempts to call her cell phone went unanswered, he said he became concerned and decided to report her missing. Dale told deputies that Dee Ann had taken her phone, her purse, and some clothes, but had left other personal items behind. The responding deputies from the Lenawee County Sheriff's Office took Dale's statement and began the standard missing person protocol. They obtained a description of Dee Ann and her vehicle. They entered her information into missing person databases. They contacted local hospitals and checked accident reports. They began reaching out to Dee Ann's family and friends to see if anyone had heard from her. This is where Dale Warner's story started to fall apart almost immediately. When deputies contacted Dee Ann's daughter Greg, she was shocked. Greg told investigators that she spoke to her mother almost every single day. They were extremely close. Dee Ann had not contacted Greg, had not told her she was leaving, and had not reached out since her alleged departure. Greg said emphatically that her mother would never disappear without telling her where she was going, especially not for more than a day. Greg also told deputies something crucial. She said that just a few weeks earlier, her mother had told her that if anything ever happened to her, to look at Dale. Dee Ann had apparently become genuinely afraid of her husband and had expressed this fear to her daughter. Greg told investigators that her mother had been planning to leave Dale, that she had been documenting finances and preparing to file for divorce, and that Dale knew about it. Other family members and friends of Dee Ann echoed Greg's concerns. Everyone who knew Dee Ann said the same thing. She would never disappear voluntarily without contacting her family. She would never leave without taking important items like her medications, which were still at the house. And she would never abandon her responsibilities to the business without any explanation. Investigators obtained Dee Ann's cell phone records immediately. The records showed that Dee Ann's phone had been active on April 24th, making and receiving calls throughout the day. The last activity on the phone was at approximately 10:47 p.m. on April 24th. After that time, the phone went completely dead. It never connected to another cell tower. It was never turned on again. The location data from the cell phone showed that when it went dark at 10:47 p.m., it was at or very near the Warner residence on Munger Road. If Dee Ann had truly driven away at 11 p.m. as Dale claimed, her phone should have connected to cell towers along whatever route she took. The fact that the phone died at the house and never moved was a major red flag. Bank and credit card records showed no activity on any of Dee Ann's accounts after April 24th. No withdrawals, no purchases, no ATM transactions. Dee Ann's white Chrysler 300 was never seen again on any traffic cameras or by any witnesses. Despite statewide alerts and media coverage of her disappearance, no one reported seeing Dee Ann or her vehicle after April 24th. Within days of Dee Ann's disappearance, investigators from the Lenawee County Sheriff's Office had serious doubts about Dale Warner's story. Detective Sergeant Chris Minkler was assigned as the lead investigator on the case. He quickly came to believe that Dee Ann Warner had not left voluntarily, that she had likely been the victim of foul play, and that Dale Warner was the primary suspect. On April 28th, just 3 days after Dale reported Dee Ann missing, investigators executed a search warrant on the Warner property. The property included the main house, several outbuildings including barns and storage sheds, and approximately 40 acres of land, much of it wooded. It was a large property with many places where evidence could potentially be hidden. Forensic teams spent days searching the Warner residence. They brought in cadaver dogs trained to detect the scent of human remains. The dogs showed interest in several areas of the property, including the basement of the house, the garage, and one of the outbuildings. However, no physical evidence of Dee Ann's remains was found during this initial search. Investigators used luminol in various areas of the house to check for traces of blood that might have been cleaned up. They found no positive reactions. They examined Dale and Dee Ann's bedroom, bathrooms, and common areas. They seized computers, phones, documents, and financial records. They photographed and documented everything. They also searched for Dee Ann's white Chrysler 300. If Dale's story was true, the car should be somewhere. but extensive searches of the property and surrounding areas found no trace of the vehicle. It had seemingly vanished just like Dee Ann. When investigators interviewed Dale Warner a second time after the search warrant, they pressed him on the inconsistencies in his story. They confronted him with the cell phone evidence showing that Dee Ann's phone died at the house and never moved. They asked him how he could explain that if Dee Ann had driven away. Dale's answers were vague and unsatisfying. He suggested that maybe Dee Ann had turned off her phone before leaving. When investigators pointed out that the phone hadn't just been turned off but had never been turned back on, and that Dee Ann had no other phone and no way to contact anyone, Dale had no explanation. Investigators also questioned Dale about Dee Ann's vehicle. Where would she have gone? How would she be surviving without money or her phone? Dale insisted he didn't know. He maintained that Dee Ann had left of her own accord and that he had no idea where she had gone. Detective Minkler interviewed numerous friends and family members of Dee Ann. Every single person said the same thing. Dee Ann would not have left voluntarily. She was too close to her family. She was too responsible. She would never abandon the business she had worked so hard to build. And most importantly, she would never disappear without telling anyone where she was going, especially not her daughter Greg. Multiple people told investigators about the deteriorating state of the Warner marriage. Several friends mentioned that Dee Ann had told them she was planning to divorce Dale and that she was worried about his reaction. One friend recalled a conversation from early April 2021, just weeks before Dee Ann disappeared, in which Dee Ann said, "If anything ever happens to me, it was Dale." This statement, repeated by multiple people who had heard similar things from Dee Ann, was chilling. It suggested that Dee Ann had genuine fear for her safety and that she believed Dale was capable of harming her. As the investigation continued into May and June of 2021, Detective Minkler and his team built a comprehensive case file. They had established that Dee Ann's disappearance was highly suspicious. They had documented Dale's inconsistent statements. They had gathered evidence that Dee Ann feared her husband and was planning to leave him. They had confirmed that Dee Ann had not accessed any of her bank accounts or used her credit cards. They had cell phone evidence that contradicted Dale's timeline. But they had one critical problem: no body. Without physical evidence that Dee Ann was dead, without a crime scene, without blood evidence or forensic proof of violence, building a murder case would be extremely difficult. Prosecutors in Michigan were understandably hesitant to file murder charges without a body, even though they believed Dale had killed his wife. The investigation expanded. Detectives looked into Dale Warner's background more deeply. They examined the finances of Warner Trucking and discovered that the business was not as successful as it appeared on the surface. There were debts, missed payments, and financial stress. Investigators theorized that Dale may have feared that a divorce would expose financial problems and result in him losing everything. They also discovered that in the weeks before Dee Ann's disappearance, Dale had been researching things online that raised major red flags. His internet search history, obtained through warrants, showed that he had looked up information about cadaver dogs and how they work. He had searched for information about how long it takes for a body to decompose. He had looked up septic systems and septic tanks. And disturbingly, he had researched whether police could track cell phones that had been turned off or destroyed. These searches, made in March and early April 2021, just weeks before Dee Ann vanished, were damning evidence that Dale had been planning something. Combined with Dee Ann's statements to family and friends about fearing Dale, and with the physical evidence showing Dee Ann had not left voluntarily, investigators were certain they were dealing with a homicide. In July 2021, the Lenawee County Prosecutor's Office made a decision. Despite not having found Dee Ann's body, they believed the circumstantial evidence was strong enough to file charges. On July 30th, 2021, Dale Warner was arrested and charged with open murder in the death of his wife, Dee Ann Warner. Open murder in Michigan means that prosecutors are charging murder but leaving it to the jury to determine whether it is first-degree or second-degree murder. Dale was arraigned and pleaded not guilty. He was held on a high bond due to the seriousness of the charges and the fact that he was considered a flight risk. His defense attorneys argued that the prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial, that there was no physical evidence of a crime, no body, no blood, no weapon, and no crime scene. They maintained that Dee Ann had left voluntarily, and that charging Dale with murder without proof she was even dead was unjust. The case moved slowly through the court system. Dale's defense team filed multiple motions challenging the evidence and arguing that the case should be dismissed due to lack of physical proof. The prosecution, led by Assistant Prosecutor John Roberts, maintained that the totality of the circumstantial evidence proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Dale had murdered his wife. What do you think happened to Dee Ann? Where do you think Dale hid her body? Drop your theory in the comments, because what happened next would shock even the investigators who had spent years working this case. As the case proceeded toward trial in 2022 and into 2023, Dee Ann's family never stopped searching for answers. Her daughter Greg became a tireless advocate, keeping her mother's case in the public eye, speaking to media outlets, and maintaining a social media presence dedicated to finding justice for Dee Ann. The family offered rewards for information. They organized search parties. They followed up on tips and leads, no matter how small. Detective Minkler continued working the case even after charges had been filed. He reviewed every piece of evidence repeatedly. He re-interviewed witnesses. He looked at aerial photos and property maps of the Warner land. He tried to think like Dale Warner, to figure out where someone might hide a body on a 40-acre property with buildings, wooded areas, and farmland. One thing that kept coming back to Detective Minkler was Dale Warner's internet searches about septic systems. The Warner property had both a functional septic system for the house and an old abandoned septic tank from decades earlier, when there had been a different structure on part of the land. The old septic tank was no longer in use and had been disconnected from any plumbing for years. In October 2022, more than a year after Dale's arrest, Detective Minkler decided to take another look at the abandoned septic tank on the Warner property. The tank had been checked during the initial searches in 2021, but only superficially. Cadaver dogs had shown some interest in the general area, but the tank itself had not been emptied and thoroughly examined. Detective Minkler obtained another search warrant, and in late October 2022, a team of investigators and forensic experts returned to the Warner property. They located the old septic tank, which was a large concrete structure buried partially underground. It had a concrete lid that was overgrown with vegetation and dirt. It looked like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The team carefully removed the lid and prepared to examine the contents of the tank. Septic tanks, even abandoned ones, can contain water, sediment, and organic matter. This particular tank had apparently collected rainwater and runoff over the years since it had been abandoned. The water inside was dark and murky. Investigators used pumps to begin draining the tank. As the water level slowly dropped, they used cameras and lights to try to see inside. The process was slow and methodious, and then, approximately 3 feet down into the tank, beneath the water line, they saw it. Wrapped in plastic and weighted down, there were human remains. The recovery operation took hours. Everything had to be carefully documented and photographed. The remains had to be extracted without damaging any potential evidence. When the wrapped package was finally removed from the septic tank and carefully unwrapped at the medical examiner's office, the worst fears were confirmed. The remains were those of Dee Ann Warner. After more than 18 months of searching, after hundreds of hours of investigation, after endless days of wondering and hoping by her family, Dee Ann had been found. She had been there on the property the entire time, hidden in a place Dale Warner had researched online before her death, a place he thought would keep his secret forever. The discovery of Dee Ann's remains changed everything about the prosecution's case. They now had physical proof of death. They had a crime scene. They had the exact location where Dale had hidden his wife's body, and the forensic examination of Dee Ann's remains and the materials used to conceal her would provide even more evidence. The autopsy on Dee Ann's remains was challenging due to the length of time she had been submerged and the effects of decomposition. However, the medical examiner was able to determine certain facts. The cause of death was determined to be homicidal violence, though the exact mechanism was difficult to determine due to the condition of the remains. There was evidence of trauma. The medical examiner ruled the manner of death as homicide. Forensic analysis of the plastic sheeting and materials used to wrap Dee Ann's body revealed crucial evidence. Investigators found that the type of plastic used was the same type as plastic sheeting stored in one of the outbuildings on the Warner property. Rope used to secure the plastic and weights attached to the body to keep it submerged matched rope found in Dale's barn. Most damning, investigators found Dale Warner's DNA on the materials used to wrap and conceal Dee Ann's body. Investigators also examined the concrete lid of the septic tank and found fresh tool marks consistent with the lid having been recently moved. despite the overgrown vegetation on top that made it appear undisturbed. They found fibers on the edge of the septic tank opening that matched fibers from gloves found in Dale's workshop. With this new evidence, prosecutors amended the charges against Dale Warner. He was now charged specifically with first-degree premeditated murder. The theory of the case was clear. Dale had killed Dee Ann in their home on the night of April 24, 2021, had wrapped her body, and had placed it in the abandoned septic tank on their property, all while knowing that investigators would come searching and hoping that his hiding place would go undetected. Dale's defense team tried to argue that someone else could have placed Dee Ann's body in the septic tank, possibly even after Dale was in custody. However, this theory was easily refuted. The property had been under surveillance and monitoring after Dale's arrest. No one had accessed the property in a way that would have allowed them to place a body in the septic tank. The forensic evidence of decomposition clearly indicated that Dee Ann had been in the tank since approximately the time of her disappearance in April 2021. The trial was scheduled for June 2024. Dale Warner, through his attorneys, continued to maintain his innocence, but faced with the overwhelming physical evidence, including his wife's body found on his property concealed in a manner he had researched before her death, Dale's defense options were extremely limited. As the trial date approached, the prosecution had built a comprehensive case. They had Dee Ann's statements to multiple people about fearing Dale and planning to leave him. They had Dale's inconsistent statements to police. They had the cell phone evidence proving Dee Ann never left the property. They had Dale's suspicious internet searches before Dee Ann's disappearance. They had financial motive regarding the trucking business and divorce. And most importantly, they had Dee Ann's remains found hidden on Dale's property, wrapped in materials that matched items he owned, with his DNA on them. In May 2024, just weeks before the trial was set to begin, Dale Warner's defense attorneys approached prosecutors about a possible plea agreement. After lengthy negotiations and consultations with Dee Ann's family, an agreement was reached. Dale Warner would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of 25 to 40 years in prison. On June 12, 2024, Dale Warner appeared in Lenawee County Circuit Court and changed his plea to guilty. For the first time, he admitted that he had killed his wife. However, even in his plea, Dale provided minimal details about what had happened. He stated only that he and Dee Ann had gotten into an argument on the night of April 24, 2021, that things had escalated, and that he had killed her. He then concealed her body in the septic tank and reported her missing, hoping her body would never be found. Dale did not provide details about exactly how he killed Dee Ann or what the argument was about, although prosecutors believe it was related to Dee Ann's plans to divorce him and her discovery of financial irregularities in their business. He did not express remorse during his plea hearing. He simply acknowledged the facts sufficient to support a guilty plea to second-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing in August 2024, Dee Ann's family members were given the opportunity to provide victim impact statements. Her daughter Greg stood before the court and spoke about her mother with tears streaming down her face. She talked about the 3 years of not knowing, the agony of wondering what had happened, the hope that somehow her mother might still be alive somewhere even though she knew in her heart what had likely occurred. Greg spoke about the pain of learning that her mother's body had been hidden on the property all along, discarded in a septic tank like garbage while the family searched desperately. She described having to explain to her own children what had happened to their grandmother. She talked about the nightmares, the therapy, the trauma that Dale Warner had inflicted not just on Dee Ann, but on everyone who loved her. Other family members spoke as well, describing Dee Ann as a vibrant, loving, strong woman who deserved so much better than what Dale had done to her. They spoke about the void her death had left in their lives and the anger they felt toward Dale for taking her from them and then compounding that pain by hiding her body and lying about what he had done. The judge, after hearing from Dee Ann's family, sentenced Dale Warner to 25 to 40 years in prison. Given Dale's age, 58 at the time of sentencing, this sentence means he will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. He will not be eligible for parole until he has served at least 25 years, which would make him 83 years old. The judge noted in his sentencing remarks that Dale Warner had shown no remorse, had put Dee Ann's family through years of agony by concealing what he had done, and had robbed them of the ability to properly lay Dee Ann to rest immediately after her death. The judge stated that Dale's actions before, during, and after Dee Ann's murder demonstrated a callous disregard for human life and for the suffering of others. Today, Dale Warner is incarcerated in the Michigan Department of Corrections. Dee Ann's family was finally able to hold a proper funeral service for her in September 2024, more than 3 years after her death. She was laid to rest in a cemetery in Lenawee County, surrounded by family who had never given up on finding her and bringing her home. Detective Minkler, who worked tirelessly on Dee Ann's case from the day she was reported missing until Dale's guilty plea, attended Dee Ann's funeral. He later said in an interview that Dee Ann's case was one of the most challenging and emotionally difficult of his career. The fact that it took so long to find her, that her body had been hidden on the property all along, and that her family had suffered for so long not knowing, weighed heavily on him. But he expressed gratitude that they were ultimately able to give Dee Ann's family answers and to bring Dale Warner to justice. The Warner trucking business no longer exists. After Dale's arrest, the business collapsed. The property on Munger Road where Dee Ann's body was found has been sold. The new owners filled in the septic tank, wanting no reminder of the horror that had occurred there. Dee Ann's daughter Greg has become an advocate for victims of domestic violence and for families of missing persons. She speaks publicly about her mother's case and about the warning signs of dangerous relationships. She emphasizes the importance of taking threats seriously, of believing people when they say they are afraid, and of not dismissing concerns about controlling or abusive partners. Greg often mentions the statement her mother made to multiple people before her death: "If anything happens to me, it was Dale." That statement, which seemed perhaps dramatic or paranoid at the time to some who heard it, turned out to be tragically accurate. Dee Ann knew she was in danger. She tried to protect herself by telling people about her fears, but it wasn't enough to save her life. This case highlights several important aspects of domestic violence and intimate partner homicide. Statistics show that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they attempt to leave the relationship. Dee Ann was planning to divorce Dale. She was taking steps to separate their business interests. She was preparing to leave. And Dale, rather than accept the end of the marriage, decided that if he couldn't have Dee Ann and the life they had built, no one would. The case also demonstrates the challenges law enforcement faces in no-body homicide cases. Despite strong circumstantial evidence that Dale had killed his wife, prosecutors were initially hesitant to file charges without physical proof of death. The decision to move forward with charges before Dee Ann's body was found was risky, but it kept pressure on Dale and kept the case active. When Dee Ann's remains were eventually discovered, it validated the investigators' instincts and provided the concrete evidence needed to secure a conviction. The importance of persistent investigation cannot be overstated. Detective Minkler and his team never gave up. They continued to search. They continued to re-examine evidence. They continued to think about where Dale might have hidden Dee Ann. That persistence, combined with Dale's own internet searches that pointed them toward the septic tank, ultimately led to Dee Ann being found. Dee Ann Warner was 52 years old when she was killed. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a friend, and a businesswoman. She was known for her strong personality, her work ethic, and her love for her family. She had survived challenges in her life before. She had built a successful business. She had raised children. She was planning a future free from a marriage that had become unhappy and frightening. Instead, her life was stolen from her by the man who had promised to love her. Her family wants her to be remembered not as a victim found in a septic tank, but as the strong, vibrant woman she was. They want people to know that she fought to protect herself, that she spoke up about her fears, that she tried to escape. They want her story to serve as a warning and as a call to action for anyone who knows someone in a dangerous relationship. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence or is in a controlling relationship, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and can be reached by calling 1-800-799-7233. There are resources available. There are safety plans that can be created. There are people who want to help. Dee Ann's story shows us that leaving can be dangerous, but there are ways to do it more safely with the right support and planning. If this case affected you, if Dee Ann's story matters to you, I encourage you to hit that like button and subscribe to True Crime Vault for more in-depth investigations. We cover cases that deserve to be remembered, always with respect and dignity for the victims and their families. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, but please remember to be respectful in your discussions. This is a real family still grieving a real loss. Share this video to raise awareness about domestic violence and to honor Dee Ann's memory. New investigations every week, covering cases that matter, lives that matter, and justice that must be served. Thank you for watching, and remember, these aren't just stories. These are real people whose lives were cut short, whose families still mourn, and whose memories deserve to be honored and protected.